Hello and welcome to Fishing for Truth, where Christian influencers become more than conquerors. And we also talk about identity abuse because no one is born with low self-esteem. Hi, I'm Pastor Elaine, and I am an author, shepherd, speaker, and friend. Sadly, however, I was raised by a child molester, and I grew up with a ton of chaos and chaotic relationships, as well as an addictive personality. However, due to my own journey of healing and some professional education, and also training, I get to live each day as more than a conqueror. I'm excited about being able to be here today and helping you understand how you can embrace your unique identity, overcome self-doubt, and be living each day as more than a conqueror. Now, I talk about 2 verses every episode, and I also talk about humor because humor is good for the soul. And the 2 verses that I cover are the same every single episode. And I hope that you have taken the time to look them up and grab your Bible and see, what does the scripture actually say about these things? Don't always take my word for it. Now, the first one is in Romans, and that's chapter 8, verse 37. And in this chapter, it's talking about identity, the entire chapter. So take the time to read the entire chapter if you have an extra moment. And ask yourself, what is God saying to me about this? But in this particular verse, it says that in all these things, we are more than conquerors. It doesn't say in all these things we are survivors. It doesn't even say we're victims or even a recovering person. Some people say, oh, we should be in recovery forever. We should always be recovering from something. And then people will say, well, I'm an overcomer. But in the scriptures, it says we are conquerors, but it doesn't just say we're conquerors. It says we are conquerors and more. And more. So to look at going from being a victim to a survivor, getting into recovery, learning how to recover, be an overcomer, and then truly conquer and more. And that is really what God desires for us. Now, the second verse comes from John chapter 8, verse 32. And in this particular passage is Jesus talking to his the Jews who believed him. So in the time of Jesus, there were Jews who actually came and this followed him. And those are the people that he's speaking to. And he says, if you abide in my word, then you are truly disciples of mine. So what makes a disciple? Someone who abides in the word of God. And then he goes on to say, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So often I will ask people, if you were freed from self-doubt and you were cured from all of that, what would life be like? And they often say, oh, I'd feel free. So where does freedom come from? And if what he's saying is you will know the truth creates freedom, and then being a disciple of his, being in his word. So it tells you very clearly how to live a life of freedom. So when we think about being more than conquerors, that's what my goal is, to help everybody, every Christian leader, be more than a conqueror. We do that by learning the truth, and the truth that sets us free by following the words of Christ. So again, take some time to look these up for yourself and see how God speaks to your own heart and mind about what is available for you through the knowledge of Jesus. Now, every week I also do holy humor. I call it humor of the week. And the goal here is to remind ourselves that we can have comedy, we can have levity, we can have whimsy, and often people will find me blowing bubbles and just being able to bring some levity to life, because we do talk about serious things here, but it doesn't always have to be that way. We can have balance in our lives. And so both of these came from parade.com. Like, I'm going to go to watch the parade.com. And yes, they're silly, but that's the whole idea, right? So number 1, it says, what do dentists call their x-rays? What do dentists call their x-rays? You ready? Toothpicks. Ah, yes, I know, it's silly, but that's okay. I thought it was cute. I actually thought it was cute. All right, did you hear about the first restaurant to open on the moon? Did you hear about the first restaurant to open on the moon? It had great food, but no atmosphere. Ah! So I have a lot of fun. I get to read through like all these jokes and just find different ones. And I had like 5 of them here, and I thought, okay, I don't want to overwhelm people with like ridiculous funnies, but yeah, to spend some time finding up some jokes. And I tell people, you send them in to me. You can go to identityabuse@gmail.com, send in your jokes to me, and be happy to share them on the show. To me, it's just absolutely a lot of fun. I'm excited about our guest today because we are going to conquer sleeplessness. Now, I don't know how many of you guys have had this problem, but I have had days where I cannot get to sleep. And so I'm excited to hear all that she has to share. So my guest today is Irene Gouge, and she is a Loving Lessons sleep consultant and postpartum doula. Okay, that's a lot of words right there, but we'll let her break that down for you. So Irene has helped hundreds of tired parents implement gentle sleep and parent solutions for infants, toddlers, and preschoolers. She's been an educator since 2001 and teaching middle school down to newborns. She has training and experience in perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, sensory processing disorders, reflux, and understanding the impact it may have on feed, sleep, and play patterns. Irene is known for her ability to focus on child and parent relationships, which fosters love, trust, and secure attachment with her loving, compassionate, and non-judgmental approach. And you'll hear that in the way she talks, and she's like super gentle. And we were joking about the fact that she could read nighttime stories and we would all fall asleep. Irene makes sleep-filled nights and sweet dreams a reality for families, helping them keep calm, confident, and rested. She's a resident of Holly Springs, North Carolina, enjoys spending time with her two sons who have inspired her work and her husband, Keith. In her spare time, she's a baseball and lacrosse mom and cheers on her boys with the choices they're making in each season of their life. She loves reading, drinking coffee, going on mission trips, listening to podcasts, and supporting women in their businesses. So please welcome Irene. Thank you for joining me today. And I'm so glad to have you here. And she is having some unmuting issues. But we are glad that you're able to come and go ahead and poke around and see if you can get your, let's try it now. If you can get yourself to unmute. Hey, so happy to have you join us today.
Thank you, Pastor Elaine. It's such a pleasure being here. I love your jokes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. They're silly, but they're fun. I just really think it's fun. Yeah.
Well, I tell my boys, I'm like, moms are funny. That's what we do.
And it's nice when your kids get older and then you get to like relive childhood through all the phases of life that they have. So every episode I cover, we cover two different things. One is identity abuse, which is really how our identities get damaged by incoming information. And then the second one are the four things that every Christian influencer needs to have in order to be effective. Now, all of my guests are people who are somehow influencing the world intentionally, and they're Christians. And so the four things that everybody needs are a mindset, a heart posture, a skill set, and mentorship. So mindset is really the ability to operate out of facts instead of feelings. Heart posture is strictly just your relationship with God. How healthy is that? How much are you leaning into his call? The third one is skill set, which covers predominantly for my students is speaking skills and the ability to articulate well what it is that you have to offer. And then the fourth one is mentorship, which is basically what's happening here and really having someone who's truly vested in your success. So when I go back to the whole identity concept, I like to ask all of my guests, where did you first hear about identity abuse and where did it show up in your life? And so can you share a little bit about that if it showed up at all?
Yes. So I was blessed that my counselor and a member from my church had posted information from you. And I watched one of your videos and you talked about identity abuse. And I was like, that's interesting. And so then I was like, okay, so I've been doing a lot of work, deciding to go through and figure out my past and the baggage. I come from a dysfunctional but highly performing family that has dealt with emotional, physical, and identity abuse. They don't even know that they're dealing with identity abuse. And I've also worked to overcome sexual trauma and chronic trauma as a result of growing up with like an alcoholic father. And so I find that I'm still recovering as a perfectionist, overwhelmed, anxiety, and a control freak. And I would say that I've conquered certain areas, but sometimes I have a relapse.
Right.
I think the piece that's interesting is that I kind of look at my journey like a before and after from when like my brother passed away. in 2010.
Mhm.
And what's interesting is that I've been going to counseling and therapy. And so I've been working through the different abuse and traumas. But when I heard about identity abuse, it was like, it filled in the gaps on all those missing pieces. There's a verse where it talks about being a new creation in Christ, and old things pass, behold, all things become new. And I think one of the biggest lessons I learned when my brother passed away was like, you only live one time.
Mm.
And I wondered, like, I think a question that I had was like, was I living to the fullest? And something that's really important about my younger brother is like, when we were at his funeral, like just the amount of people that came and the stories that they shared. And I was like, he was so easygoing, but I was the big sister who was kind of like type A, control freak, had to have all the boxes checked. And so it was like this, like just this hit against the wall of like, okay, how am I going to move forward? What am I going to decide to do?
And how old were you at that time?
So I was 10 years ago. So like 30 something.
Wow. Okay.
30 something or so. And I think that the thing that happened was I made two decisions as he passed. I joined a grief share group, and I actually started my sleep coaching training. And I remember my mentor, she was like, do you think that this is a good time? And I was like, I do. And it was one of those things, like, it was like, just, you could see how God was working, all those things. I recognized that this was an opportunity to really get healthy and living and standing on God's promises. And what's interesting is my company is called Loving Lessons, which I didn't really know was going to come to fruition because, 4 years before my brother passed away, I had just become a mom and I was struggling. Like, parenting was hard. Sleep was really hard. I was really anxious, overwhelmed by everything. I quit teaching so I could stay home with my boys and do a home daycare. And, there was just so much going on in my life that I was like stressed, anxious, overwhelmed. And one of the things that I discovered years later was that God actually works in parents. He changes our brain, like that brain fog that moms have. It's like a real legit thing because God wants to change our hearts. I wouldn't really know that until like probably 5 years, 6 years later. But now in hindsight, it's just been this beautiful thing to kind of discover. But I recognized that there was like this healing that needed to happen. And as I was doing the training for my sleep coaching, I thought I was going into it. I was like, we're going to figure out sleep and this is what's going to happen. But I didn't realize like the impact that like our family has on us and the dynamics about how we feed and like sensory needs and reflux and all the things. And so as I was in my classes, I was discovering like, here's all the things I didn't know all these years before my brother passed away. And it was like I was getting the words to be able to identify them. And so at that point, I thought I was kind of already healed, or so I thought, but God had other plans. He was bringing other things to life. And I remember actually after one of my classes, my son, he wasn't sleeping. I couldn't figure out what was happening. And after I got off the call with the pediatric pulmonologist, I told my husband, I said, Connor has sleep apnea. I was like, we need to go into an ENT. We need to figure this out. And so I recognized that it was this learning process for me. And my old self would like it to be just like a straight line. And I'll even say, like, I was kind of like, this is kind of how I would hope my learning could go. Very simple.
Right.
Nothing crazy. But what God was showing me was that it's really messy.
Yes.
Like, there's a lot of learning and it's messy. And I was able to work through a lot of the abuse and trauma stuff. And like, I felt like I had overcome things through the years. But what was, again, interesting about coming across you just recently was recognizing like, oh, I'm still sharing some of these stories.
Right.
And believing those lies.
Exactly. I think, and that's what I think people don't realize is that those lies, if we if we never stop and look at them directly and say, what are the lies that we believe that we're bringing into adulthood, that we don't see how they're truly impacting us right now today, and being able to look at the history of your life and the little places where it's playing out in the struggles that you're having today. I think it's interesting though, if we go back to your original story about, your dysfunctional upbringing and how your identity was abused there. Can you identify like a message that you carried into adulthood about yourself because of that identity abuse?
I think I need to work harder.
Okay.
I'm not enough.
Mm-hmm. And those are very common. Those are very common. Yeah.
Those were the two main ones.
And I think that people need to hear that we can become professionals and we can be doing a lot of really good stuff. I had a call this morning, and I run a private group for senior pastor women, and I go in there every week and we just kind of chat about whatever happens to come up. And the lady that came in, she said, "So how can I be praying for you?" And I said, "Well, this and this." She goes, "I just look at all your stuff and it looks like you have it all together and you're just like on top of everything." And you're just, I'm like going, "Honey, if I turned my camera around right now, you'd know that wasn't true." And she's like, "But it looks like," and it's like, but sometimes we look at people and we project onto them what we think about them, which is opposing what we're experiencing ourselves. And being able to say, what is it about me that causes me to do that? And going back to our childhood or whatever traumatic experiences, sometimes it's not necessarily childhood, but traumatic experience somewhere along the way that caused us to believe something about ourselves that isn't true. Mm-hmm. And then going into adulthood and saying, look at all the times that I employed that lie and struggled against that lie, and how it's inhibiting from me being all that God has designed me to be. And that's why it's interesting as I listen to your story and you say, that the concept of identity was kind of filled in some of the holes of your understanding about the struggles that you've had. And it's not necessarily like a magic wand to make it all go away, but what I'm hearing you say is the understanding actually helped you clarify some of that.
It did. I think that a lot of times as Christians, we are misunderstood because we think, oh, you're going to become a Christian, it's going to be really easy.
What?
And then I'm like, no, it's kind of like this.
Yeah, I didn't get that version
all day long. And I think that's the part where it feels like sometimes I have to present a certain way or be a certain way. And like when I've struggled with sleep, like waking up, having panic attacks in the middle of the night, and it was recognizing like, oh, these are the stories that continue coming up. And something that was interesting that I learned in your masterclass, because I said, like, when do I get to stop doing this mindset work? Because like, when will I have figured it out? But I realized like, now even 10 years later, after all the therapy, all the things that I've done, like you normalize the fact that like, I might have to do mindset work. I may have to do some reading. Like these are maybe healthy coping strategies where I'm like renewing my mind. I'm having to rewire the things that maybe I didn't know then. And I see how that impacts my relationships. I think of my old self in my relationships with my marriage, with my family, my friends, like there's distinct differences. Like people are like, you have grown in this way. And, my in-laws have a funny story. I'm like, do you remember when I was a control freak? They're kind of like
you mean yesterday?
Like did that change? And I was like, no, remember, like we couldn't spend more than 4 days together. And we can laugh about it now, but like, I can remember like my old self and who she was and recognizing like God's been growing me. And I know in like some people's walk, like they have a divine moment and everything changes. And for me, like, well, when my brother passed away, it really was this like learning and growing experience. Like I just was able to see miracles show up. And like, this is a time where we think like, do miracles really happen? And I've been blessed to be able to see them along the way. And, it's a miracle to even see where my marriage is now compared to where it was even like a year ago when I first met you.
Awesome. That is so awesome. Yeah. I wanted to read that verse that you referred to about renewing of the mind. And this is Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. It says, I urge you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. And to think about the verses that we talked about earlier. And again, we talk about the renewing your mind. And that's what you were saying about, being inside the masterclass. I say all the time, we need to remember this stuff when we read our Bible more than once, because we need to remember what it says. And we can get out in the world and we don't have a lot of really good, healthy, positive incoming information on a regular basis. And so to be able to step aside and say, okay, I need to remember the things that I remembered before. I need to employ the things that I employed before that work, and give ourselves permission to say, I don't know it all. I can't employ it all on the fly every day, all the time, because I read it once. And I think that that's just really, really valuable information. I do want to ask you, how did you get into the whole sleep thing? I mean, how did you, what attracted you to that? And did you like automatically want to do that, or what? I mean, can you fill in that little hole?
So what was interesting is my brother passed away. I had been following the sleep lady, and she was starting the first 50 gentle sleep class.
And what attracted you to her? How did you find, I mean, was there like a sleep issue?
There was a sleep issue with my son. And I was kind of figuring out, what could I do, not go back into the classroom, but still teach. And when my brother passed away, what's interesting is there was like a sum of money that I got. And I was like, I went to my husband, my brother, and I'm pretty sure my other brother, and they thought I was crazy. Like, so I think I'm going to do this sleep coaching class. And so I signed up for it. And literally that training, it was one of those things, like, it gave me the words and the information I needed to understand how I grew up and how that impacted me, and understanding like the families that I would connect with, like understanding that it's not like, sleep is more complex than we think. And when we think about being sleepless, like, it's not just a matter of like just a bedtime routine. It's like, how do we start our day? How are we taking care of our bodies, moving them, eating the foods we eat, and then the way we think, how much that impacts us. And those are the messages we also share with our children that impact our children. And so we don't realize it's just this continuous journey. And so, I mean, it was just kind of like such a divine thing. Like when I look back at that journey, it's like everything happened exactly how it was supposed to. And as much as I miss my brother, it's like such a great blessing to be able to connect with others.
And the scriptures do say that God makes beauty from ashes, right? And joy out of mourning. And so in your life, you're an example of that you went through this time of loss and grieving, but through that and through your faith and your following of God, he said, here's a gift that I can give you out of that. So when you remember this experience, now look at all the people that you're able to bless. And it's not like, oh, hey, my brother died. Yay, this is fantastic. And because that annoys me about people, that God caused that in order for you. And that's like, no, but he makes beauty from ashes, and he brings joy out of mourning. And what an honor to his name that you've been able to take this experience and then help not only yourself and your children, but then multitudes of other families through that. And that's really, really awesome.
Yeah. It's been such a blessing. And, I think too, like sometimes we don't realize like how many women may deal with infant loss and how that impacts them in their parenting journey. And, I meet with parents, and a lot of times they'll be like, oh, it's not a big deal. Like, let's deal with this right now. And it's like, we kind of got to deal with all of it. And I think that's one of the things that why it was important for me to understand that grief share journey, because I learned and understood grief and all the emotions behind it. And I think, you talked about mindset being, is it emotional or factual with truth? And I spent a good majority of my life living based on emotion, like making decisions in those emotions.
And I don't think people realize how frequent that is. I was talking about emotional manipulation, and that the majority of our conversations are based on emotional manipulation. We will cut people down, or we'll minimize things, or we'll project stuff. And the average person, I know this was for me, so I mean, maybe I'm abnormal, but when I stopped and said, how many times in a regular day when I'm conversing with people do I use emotionally laden information when talking in order to gain sympathy or commiseration, or activation? And it was just startling to me. I thought, wow. And when you do that, yeah, it's like, how do we just like step back and say, okay, let's just be factual. Let's just ask for what we need and say yes when we mean yes and no when we mean no, and be okay with that. It is really a startling way that we relate as humankind. I'm really proud of you of what you've done, because my brother passed away. He was really young. And I was in my mid-30s, and I did not handle it well. I was so mad at God. I was like so mad at God. And the only consolation that I have now when I think back on that is the fact that I can't be mad at somebody that I don't believe in, right? So it's not that I like chucked God, but I was so mad. I mean, I'm like, my younger brother was the most kind, loving, sweet person. And he had a complicated disorder from childhood. And we believe that he had a seizure and passed away. And you probably don't want to know the details of that, but he had 2 kids that were 1 and 2 years old. And, and so he left a wife and 2 kids. And I'm just like, why? I was abused by my dad. My mom was abusive. My older brother was a severe drug addict. And then I was like a wreck. And then there's my little brother, and he's gone. So I was like hugely mad at God for a long time. And you made something good out of it. All I did was recover. So,
well, but I think what's interesting though, that you say that, like, because a lot of times people will think that, but we don't realize it was messy. Like, we don't really sit and talk about it, and that's one of the things I've had to learn is like, how do I sit in that discomfort? And I decided that I was going to practice that. And it's not fun. And I get tired sometimes, not going to lie.
Right. And it's true. When we work with people, it does get tiresome. And people have asked me that often, how do you handle that? And just this really kind of off topic, but what I've learned to do is that when I'm engaging with somebody, I'll say, here's the tools, here's what I perceive about your situation, and here's some tools to help you cope and make progress. And then when our connection is over, it's up to them to either employ them or not. And I would tell people, it's not that I'm callous or that I don't care. I've heard a lot of stories over my life, and it's not that I don't get moved by them, but I don't change my understanding of life or myself based on somebody else's experience. And I think the power in that is again, that strength of identity. I know who God designed me to be, and I'm going to embrace that. And I'm going to hear a lot of stuff, but I'm not going to change what I perceive about myself based on somebody else's experiences.
Very true.
Yes. And so one of the things that we talked about today was mindset. So hopefully, as you guys were paying attention to all of our conversation, that mindset is extremely, extremely powerful. When we talk about identity abuse, your identity is based on what you believe about yourself. You can choose to believe what's true, even if it doesn't feel true. And this is stepping back enough to say, what am I thinking and why am I thinking it? And so, Irene, what I hear you saying is that through all of these experiences, you were able to step back and say, I'm going to pursue this thing. And not only is it going to help me and my child, but it's going to help other people as well. And even though my family didn't understand me, or my therapist wasn't certain the timing was good, God obviously said, now's the time. Yeah.
And I think it's stepping in that obedience, like sometimes it doesn't make sense. And that's the part that's scary in our Christian walk, is sometimes we're like, really? Like, you want me to do that? Like, I don't know if that's the right timing, God. And I've had so many of those moments, but I think it was like learning to tune into that and be obedient to what God is calling us to do. That gives me the courage and the faith to continue.
Absolutely. And we know that God's ways are higher than our ways. And I love the whole idea of divine imagination. And we also have divine authority. We have, all of this opportunity that God has gifted us when we decide to walk in the center of his will. So thank you, Irene, for coming and joining us today. And if you want to know more about what Irene is doing, please go to loving-lessons.com, fishing4truth-lessons.com. And to find out more about how you can connect with me, you can go to fishing4truth.com. That's fishing4truth.com. And I will see you all on another episode. Take care.
Thank you.